điều khiển trận đấu này trong tài xế Nguyễn Văn Đông trong tay trống Nguyễn Văn Đông trong tài xế Nguyễn Văn Đông tổng trọng tài ông Nguyễn Văn Hải chúng theo đài dưới sự điều khiển của đội bạn.
Ito mga paps ha, para lang sa hindi pa nakakalam at sa mga nakakalam na naman, di mabuti at alam nyo na ha. Pagka nandito kayo sa Skyway at papunta kayo ng BGC, Wag na kayong dumaan
Some people with a little experience in chess may have heard of the famous four-move checkmate for a beginner with e4, controlling the center and opening lines for the light square bishop and queen. Black responds with e5, controlling the center and opening up lines. And after bishop to c4, white quickly brings the bishop to an active diagonal, controlling the center and pointing at the weak f7 square. Notice the f7 square is only protected by black's king. Black typically plays knight to c6, making a sensible developing move, or sometimes will play bishop to c5. In either case, white has the option of the aggressive queen to h5, joining the bishop in the attack against the key f7 square. If black isn't careful, white will deliver checkmate on the very next move. Knight f6 is a very common mistake. Center and pointing at the weak f7 square. Notice the f7 square is only protected by black's king. Black typically plays knight to c6, making a sensible developing move, or sometimes will play bishop to c5. In either case, white has the option of the aggressive queen to h5, joining the bishop in the attack against the key f7 square. If black isn't careful, white will deliver checkmate on the very next move. Knight f6 is a very common mistake. Black moves the knight toward the center and threatens to win the queen. What could possibly be wrong with this move? Unfortunately, it forces the white queen to move exactly where it wanted to go, the f7 square, and deliver checkmate. You'll notice that the black king has nowhere to run. Black also can't block the check as the queen is literally touching the king. Notice black has no piece to capture the queen, and the king cannot capture the queen, because then the light square bishop would capture the king, and that's not allowed. This is the 4-move checkmate. Now let's go back and see how black could have avoided this unfortunate end to the game. After the moves e4, e5, bishop c4, knight c6, and queen h5, black must block the f7 square. The best way to do this is by playing g6. It attacks the queen, and it prevents the queen from capturing f7. White retreats the queen, but don't celebrate too early. The white queen refocuses its attack on the f7 square, threatening checkmate on the very next turn. Black can once again block the queen's path to the f7 square and develop a piece at the same time with knight f6. Notice if white tried to capture the knight, black would recapture and win the queen. At this point, black is safe and white has wasted some time running around with the queen. Finally, we have one more aggressive idea to be prepared for when our opponent tries to win the game with the 4-move checkmate. After e4, e5, white does not have to play bishop to c4 on the next turn. White could play the more aggressive queen h5. White threatens the weakened f7 square and threatens to win the e5 pawn with check. Remember, it's very important to defend the e5 pawn first and only then block the queen's attack on the f7 square. The best move for black is knight c6, developing a piece toward the center and protecting the e5 pawn. After bishop to c4, white's bishop joins the attack on the f7 square. Do you remember how black can best block the f7 square and attack the queen? That's right, g6. White sets up another checkmate with queen f3, threatening to take on f7. Do you remember how to block the second checkmate attack? That's right, knight to f6. Now that you've learned what the 4-move checkmate is, it's time to see what you've learned. In the 4-move checkmate lesson, we learned a new concept where black was checkmated by the white queen, and black couldn't capture the queen with the king because the queen was protected by the bishop on c4, like this. A king can never put itself in check, even when capturing. So many times when you checkmate, it's done by one piece who is checking, and one piece that is protecting and assisting the other piece. Let's see some examples of assisted checkmates. In this position, white can deliver checkmate by using the queen to put the king in check with the assistance of the pawn protecting the queen. Can you see the mate in one? If you found queen g7 checkmate, great job. The queen attacks the king, and the king cannot escape the check because the queen covers all of the king's escape squares and the pawn protects the queen, meaning the black king cannot capture the queen. It's checkmate. Game over. Let's look at another example. In this position, black's king does not have any legal squares. Notice that both the white knight and queen join together on the g8 square, right next to the king. White can deliver a check with the queen that is assisted by the knight on e7 with queen g8, checkmate. Now that you've learned how pieces assist each other in delivering checkmate, it's your turn to practice assisted checkmates. It's very rare to checkmate with just one piece. It usually requires several pieces to surround and finally checkmate the king. One of the most important examples of this is checkmating with two rooks, sometimes called the rook roller. Let's see how this works. In this position, notice the rook on c2 controls the entire c-file. This means that the black king cannot enter the c-file as long as the rook is on that file. Rook d1 checks the king on the d-file, and since the king can't enter the c-file, black's king is forced to move closer to the edge of the board. Now that the d-file is covered by the rook on d1, let's use the other rook to check the king on the e-file. Rook e2 check. Notice that the rooks take turns checking the king, cutting the black king off one file at a time. Let's watch the rook rollers roll the king up onto the edge of the board and deliver checkmate. After king f7, we bring the other rook to the f-file, checking the king. The king moves to the g-file. Now that the f-file is covered, we play rook to g2 check. The king is forced to the edge of the board and has run out of files. It's checkmate on the next move with rook h1, checkmate. The rook roller doesn't only work on files, it also works on ranks. Notice the rook on h4 covers the entire fourth rank. So in this case, we use the other rook to check the king on the fifth rank. And since the fourth rank and fifth rank are now covered by the rooks, the king gets rolled up the board again. King c6, rook h6 check, king to d7, rook to g7 check, and after king e8, rook h8, checkmate. Now that you've learned how to checkmate with two rooks against the king, it's your turn to practice checkmating with the rook rollers. Even the powerful queen cannot checkmate the king all by itself. Many times you will find yourself with just your king and queen against the other king, and you need to know how to finish the job. It can be pretty frustrating unless you know what you're doing. Let's see how it works. In this position, we can use an assisted checkmate idea to win the game in just one move. Notice that the white king and queen both meet on the G7 square, right next to the black king. The queen can move to that square, checking the black king, and since the white queen is protected by its own king, the game is checkmate. Delivering a checkmate in the corner of the board is nice, but how do we force the king to the corner and set up checkmate? Let's take a look. In this position, black's king is on the central square D5. In order to checkmate the king, it must be forced to the edge of the board. Notice that the black king can move to any of the other central squares on the next turn, D4, E4, or E5. White's first goal is to prevent the king from staying in the center of the board and pushing it toward the corners. Queen to E3 prevents the king from staying in the center, so the king must move toward the corners. After king D6, white's next job is to prevent the black king from returning to the center. Queen to E4. Notice the queen is keeping the king out of the center, and it's slowly pushing the black king toward the corner. You'll also see that white's queen is always one knight move distance away from the black king. We'll see the white queen continue to shadow the king a knight's distance away for the rest of the game. Black plays king C5, still trying to stay near the center, and white plays queen D3. After king C6, queen D4. Notice black moves up a square, white's queen moves up a square. The black king moves down a diagonal square, the queen moves down a diagonal square. The king moves up, the queen moves up. Notice always a knight's distance away. After king A7, the king goes up a diagonal square, the white queen goes up a diagonal square as well. Now comes the most important part of this position. After king A8, should the white queen continue to shadow the king a knight's distance away? If queen B6 is played, the black king does not have a legal square, but it is also not check. Do you remember what we call that when that happens? That's right, stalemate. It's a draw. So be sure to avoid that move. In this position, once you get the king into the corner, allow it to continue to dance on these two squares, back and forth, until your white king is able to set up an assisted checkmate. Let's see how that works. After king C2, king A7, king C3, king A8, king C4, king A7, king C5, king A8, king C6, king A7. Now that white's king is close to the queen, can you find an assisted checkmate in this position? That's right. Queen to B7, checkmate. The white king assists the queen in delivering the checkmate to the king. Now that you've learned how to checkmate with the queen versus king, it's your turn to As you've already learned, checkmate with two rooks is pretty easy, and checkmating with just one queen is simple too, once you know how to do it. Another common checkmate comes from king plus rook versus king. In this position, you don't have the power of the queen, and instead have to use some patience to get the job done. Let's see how to do it. The first thing the rook needs to do is put the king into a box. After rook h4, notice the black king is within this box, and white's goal is to never allow the black king to escape from this box. Black's king gets closer to the rook, and white's rook, unlike the queen, will need help from the king to push the black king into the corner and deliver checkmate. The reason why is the rook cannot move diagonally, so the lone king can sneak up and attack the rook from a diagonal. This means white needs to bring the king closer to the rook and protect it, like this. After king g5, black threatens to win white's rook, and white's king arrives just in time to protect the rook. White begins the slow but effective plan of pushing black's king back into a corner in order to deliver checkmate. After every move, the side with the rook has to ask, can my rook safely shrink the box? If the answer is yes, then move the rook. If the answer is no, then move the king closer to the opponent's king. In this position, can white's rook safely shrink the box? Yes, it can, with rook g4. How about now? Can white shrink the box again? If you said rook f4, you're correct. White shrinks the box once again. After king d5, can white shrink the box? Well, not safely, because after rook e4, the king would just take the rook. Also notice if the rook moves to f5, the king is able to run outside of the box. So remember, when you can't shrink the box, move your king closer to the opponent's king, like this. After king e5, can white shrink the box now? Notice if rook e4 check, the black king is able to move outside of the box. Remember, in a rook and king versus king position, only check the king with the rook when it is checkmate. Otherwise, bring your king closer to the opponent's king. White brings the king closer to the other king, and after king d5, can white shrink the box? You bet. Rook e4. So slowly but surely, white is making progress. After king d6, white cannot shrink the box safely, so white brings the king closer to the opponent's king. After king c6, can white shrink the box? Absolutely. Rook e5. After king d6, black decides to give white some trouble. In this position, I can't shrink the box as white, because if we play rook to d5 check, the king escapes. But also, how do I move the king closer to the opponent's king? I can't. So what do we do here? In this position, we just need to move our king somewhere to protect our rook. And in fact, there's only one square to do it. King e4. After king c6, can white shrink the box now? Absolutely. Rook to d5. And notice, white's making some real progress now. After king c7, white brings the king closer to the opponent's king. And after king c6, white continues to bring the king closer. After king c7, can white shrink the box now? Absolutely. Rook to d6. And after king to b7, white plays king to d7, getting closer to the opponent's king. After king b8, can white shrink the box? Yes, after rook c6. White's getting really close to pushing that king into the corner. After king b7, here we are again. White cannot shrink the box, but we also can't move the king closer to the opponent's king. What to do? When this happens, it's simple. Just protect your rook and make black move. Black moves to b8, and can you shrink the box now with the rook? Absolutely. Rook to c7. And after king to a8, white brings the king closer to the opponent's king. King b8, white moves the king closer again. And now, after king a8, the king is finally in the corner, and white is ready to deliver a checkmate. Can you see which rook move will deliver checkmate? If you found rook to c8, checkmate, great job. White delivers a checkmate. After learning how to checkmate with the queen and king, and now the rook and king versus king, you may expect the next videos to include checkmate. In chess, you are constantly capturing pieces and making trades on the chessboard. But how do you know if you should capture or trade? Obviously, the queen is the most valuable piece, but what about the other pieces? Fortunately, there is an easy way to evaluate trades based on a numerical value for the pieces. Let's take a look. Each pawn is worth 1. You can think of this as $1 if it helps. The knights are worth 3, and the bishops are worth 3. So basically, the knights and bishops are the same, though in many positions, bishops are better, and in some positions, knights are better. Rooks are worth 5 points, and queens are worth 9. Well, what about the king? It's worth the whole game. Let's review that. Pawns are worth 1, knights are worth 3, bishops are also worth 3, rooks are worth 5, Chess is a game of strategy where you have to make plans to win, but it is also a game of tactics. Strategies are the longer-term ideas and goals, and tactics are the short-term, immediate moves you can use to gain the advantage. You will learn about many different kinds of chess tactics, moves that directly help you win material, or even deliver checkmate. But the simplest one of all is the hanging piece. A hanging piece is another word for a free piece. It's a piece hanging out all by itself, unprotected, and available to be captured for free. Obviously, you can't base an entire strategy on capturing hanging pieces, but you can sure benefit from the tactics of finding hanging pieces. Let's take a look at some examples together. In this position, it's white to move. Can you find any unprotected pieces in black's camp? The rook on a8 is unprotected. It's all alone. When you find an unprotected piece, the next step is to see if it's a strategy where you have to make plans to win, but it is also a game of tactics. Strategies are the longer-term ideas and goals, and tactics are the short-term, immediate moves you can use to gain the advantage. You will learn about many different kinds of chess tactics, moves that directly help you win material, or even deliver checkmate. But the simplest one of all is the hanging piece. A hanging piece is another word for a free piece. It's a piece hanging out all by itself, unprotected, and available to be captured for free. Obviously, you can't base an entire strategy on capturing hanging pieces, but you can sure benefit from the tactics of finding hanging pieces. Let's take a look at some examples together. In this position, it's white to move. Can you find any unprotected pieces in black's camp? The rook on a8 is unprotected. It's all alone. When you find an unprotected piece, the next step is to see if it's a hanging piece, and the way to know that is if there's another piece that can just capture that piece. So in this position, can one of white's pieces capture the rook on a8? Yes, the queen. The rook is completely hanging. White wins the rook for free. In this position, black notices that white has two unprotected pieces, the rook on d2 and the knight on a3. So black decides to attack both of those pieces at once, as if there's another piece that can just capture that piece. So in this position, can one of white's pieces capture the rook on a8? Yes, the queen. The rook is completely hanging. White wins the rook for free. In this position, black notices that white has two unprotected pieces, the rook on d2 and the knight on a3. So black decides to attack both of those pieces at once with the queen. One way to avoid hanging pieces is to always ask before making a move, is the square I plan to move to a safe square? Or can something capture my piece on that square? Black didn't ask that question and didn't realize that white's queen was already protecting the a5 square. Black's queen is hanging. Let's take a look at one more position together. In this position, white is ready to promote the pawn currently on b7 into a queen on the very next move. And since there's nothing on the back rank, white's expecting a back rank checkmate. Unfortunately for white, white's in for a surprise. After promoting, now the queen is checking the black king, and white is expecting the rook to retreat, and in this case, the queen would just take the rook, and it would be a back rank checkmate. However, is there something protecting the b8 square? Look at that. The bishop was protecting the promotion square. White's queen was completely hanging. Now that you've learned how to look for your opponent's hanging pieces and avoid hanging your own pieces, it's your turn to practice taking advantage of hanging pieces. positions, in this position, does white have any trades? Yes, white could trade a rook for a queen. Is this a good trade? Absolutely. This is a great trade for white. White gave up a 5-point piece, the rook, for a 9-point piece, the queen. White gained 4 points from that trade. In this position, white has the chance to trade a rook for a knight. Is this a good trade? White gives up a 5-point piece, capturing a 3-point piece. It's not such a good trade. White loses 2 points out of that trade. Let's take a look at one more position. In this position, white can play rook takes d8, trading a rook for a rook. Is this a good trade? An even trade isn't bad. And let's say the bishop recaptures, offering a bishop trade. And another even trade happens, bishop for bishop. After all of these trades, white did not win any material. Both sides traded one rook and one bishop each. Notice white was up a pawn before all these trades happened, so white's position is still pretty good. But was there a better way white could have handled this position? Let's take a look. When you have a chance to capture or trade pieces, remember to look at all of your options first. Was rook takes d8 white's only option to trade pieces? Look at white's bishop. White could have played bishop takes d8. White trades a bishop worth 3 points for a rook worth 5 points. Remember, it is usually a good idea to capture with your least valuable piece first. Let's say black recaptures with the rook. White now has the chance to trade rooks, 5 points for 5 points. Is this a good trade for white? You might think it's just even, but remember this idea. When you are ahead in material, it's good to trade pieces. When you are behind in material, you should avoid trades and keep the position complicated. Since white is up material, this is a good idea to trade rooks. White now has a much better endgame. White is up a rook for a bishop and has an extra pawn. Now that you've learned the value of the pieces, let's see if you can use these values to decide whether or not to trade pieces. Chess is a game of strategy where you have to make plans to win, but it is also a game of tactics. Strategies are the longer-term ideas and goals, and tactics are the short-term, immediate moves you can use to gain the advantage. You will learn about many different kinds of chess tactics, moves that directly help you win material, or even deliver checkmate. But the simplest one of all is the hanging piece. A hanging piece is another word for a free piece. It's a piece hanging out all by itself, unprotected, and available to be captured for free. Chess Chess is a game of strategy where you have to make plans to win, but it is also a game of tactics. Strategies are the longer-term ideas and goals, and tactics are the short-term, immediate moves you can use to gain the advantage. You will learn about many different kinds of chess tactics. It's
Moves
very
that
rare to
directly help you
checkmate
win
with just
material
one piece.
or even
It
deliver
usually
checkmate.
requires several pieces to surround and finally checkmate the king. One of the most important examples of this is check. But the simplest one of all is the hanging piece. A hanging piece is another word for a free piece. It's a piece hanging out all by itself, unprotected, and available to be captured for free. Obviously, you can't base an entire strategy on capturing hanging pieces, but you can sure benefit from the tactics of finding hanging pieces. Let's take a look at some examples together. In this position, it's white to move. Can you find any unprotected pieces in black's camp? The rook on a8 is unprotected. It's all alone. When you find an unprotected piece, the next step is to see if it's a hanging piece, and the way to know that is if there's another piece that can just capture that piece. So in this position, can one of white's pieces capture the rook on a8? Yes, the queen. The rook is completely hanging. White wins the rook for free. In this position, white is attacking the pawn on d5, but black is also defending that pawn. So how do we know if capturing the pawn on d5 is a good idea for white? Let's count. Usually you want to have at least one more attacker than your opponent has defenders. Notice white has two attackers, the rook on d3 and the bishop on f3. Black, on the other hand, only has one defender, the rook on d8. Since white has one more attacker than black has defenders, white will make the first and the last capture, usually a good sign for the attacker. White makes the first capture with rook takes d5, capturing black's pawn. Black captures white's rook with rook takes d5. So far, white has only captured a pawn and black has captured a rook, but white gets the final capture with bishop takes d5, capturing black's rook. Notice that both sides captured a rook, but white also captured a pawn, meaning white won a pawn from the captures thanks to having one more attacker than black had a defender. Let's take a look at another position. In this position, notice that white has two attackers against black's pawn on d5, the rook on d4 and the bishop on f3. Black, however, has two defenders, the rook on d8 and the bishop on e6. So there's two attackers against two defenders. When there is the same number of attackers and defenders, the defense usually has the advantage. The reason why is that although the attacker captures first, the defense captures last. Let's see this idea in action. After bishop takes d5, white captures first, taking the pawn on d5, so white is currently up a pawn. Let's keep track of all the captures as we go along. Black captures white's bishop with rook takes d5. So black has captured a bishop and white only a pawn. After rook takes d5, white captures the black rook. So white has now captured a rook and a pawn, and black has only captured a bishop. White is in the lead for now, but black gets the last capture with bishop takes d5, capturing white's rook. Let's review the captures. Black captured a bishop and a rook, and white captured a pawn and a rook. Since both sides captured a rook, they cancel each other out, and we see what's left. Black captured a bishop, and white captured a pawn. This means black won a bishop for a pawn. Since two attackers did not succeed against two defenders, white needs to add one more attacker to the d5 pawn. Can you see how white can do this? That's right, knight to c3. White now has 3 attackers against 2 defenders. Black would like to add a third defender to keep the balance between attackers versus defenders, but black cannot add a third defender on the next move. So black plays knight to g6, dreaming of playing knight e7 on the next turn in order to add that third defender to the d5 pawn. White should not allow this to happen and should capture the d5 pawn right away. Does it matter which way white captures? It sure does. When you decide to capture, it's a good idea not to capture with your most valuable attacking piece first. Since the bishop and knight are both worth 3 points, the 5-point piece, the rook, should not capture first. Why? Because after rook takes d5, black is able to trade white's most valuable attacker for black's least valuable defender, the bishop. So after bishop takes d5 and knight takes d5, notice that black captured white's rook and white captured a bishop and a pawn. Black gained 5 points and white only gained 4 from these trades. This means black got the better deal from the captures. Since capturing with the most valuable attacking piece lost material for white, white should capture with the least valuable attacking piece first. The least valuable attacking pieces are the knight and the bishop, so either capture would be fine. Let's capture with the bishop first. After bishop takes d5, white makes the first capture, gaining a pawn. Black captures white's bishop with bishop takes d5. Black is currently up a bishop for a pawn, but white gets the next capture. In this position, white could capture with the least valuable piece again with knight takes d5, and it would be a good choice. But notice that white can also decide to play rook takes d5, capturing with the most valuable piece. Why is it okay to take with the most valuable piece now, but it wasn't good a move before? The reason why is that black's only remaining defensive piece is the rook, which is as valuable as white's rook. You do not want to capture with the most valuable piece when your opponent can capture with a less valuable piece, such as in the last example where white lost a rook for a bishop. After rook takes d5, black captures white's rook, and now white makes the final capture with knight takes d5, capturing black's rook. Both sides captured a rook as well as a bishop, but white also captured a pawn, so white won a pawn by counting carefully and making the right moves. Let's take a look at one more position together. Is it always true that when there are an equal number of defenders against attackers, that the defense will get the better deal from the captures? Not always. In this position, white has 2 attackers against f7, the knight on g5 and the bishop on c4. Black has 2 defenders, the queen on e7 and the king on e8. White captures a pawn with knight takes f7. If black takes the knight, the queen must make the first capture because the king would put itself into check by capturing the knight. Since the queen is worth more than both of white's attackers, the knight and the bishop, black will lose material after queen takes f7, bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7. White captured a queen and a pawn worth 10 points for a bishop and a knight worth 6 points, so white gained 4 points from the captures. Counting is a very useful idea, but remember not to blindly follow the counting method. You always have to think carefully with each position. Now that you've learned the importance of counting, it's time to practice counting captures to One of the most powerful tactics in chess
much.